and welcome to another episode of Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Bullock, and today we have a very interesting show. I know this gentleman, our guest, from the International Emergency Management Society. I've met him many years ago. I believe it was in China the first time I met him. And he had a lot of things to convey and great messages, for the team's organization. And he's based in Nepal. So today he's going to be talking with us about the Nepal earthquakes and the floods that they've recently had this year. So my guest today is Professor Meen Chhetri from Nepal. Welcome to the show, Professor.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
And how are you today?
I'm fine.
Wonderful. So let's get started to talk about the Nepal earthquake. Well, first of all, actually, can you give us a little bit of history of yourself, what you've done, and a bit of a background biography for our listeners, so we know all your expertise?
Okay, actually, I used to work in the government for a long time, since 1985 to 2010. In various ministries and departments, and basically I was involved in disaster management and disaster risk reduction in Nepal while working in the Ministry of Home Affairs of Nepal, because Ministry of Home Affairs is the focal agency for disaster risk reduction in Nepal. So I used to work there for about 12 years between 2002 to 2012. And also I worked in various other ministries and departments. And currently I am working in an NGO called Nepal Center for Disaster Management, which is a NGO and which coordinates between the government and the civil society organizations in disaster risk reductions in Nepal. And as you mentioned, I am also affiliated with TEAMS, the International Emergency Management Society, where I am the chair of a paper review committee. So in brief, this is my introduction.
And correct me if I'm wrong, I remember seeing you've got some interesting designations, correct? I think you received something from the Prime Minister of Nepal or the President or something a couple of years ago?
Oh, yes. That was in 2014 from the Deputy Prime Minister of Nepal. That is called Disaster Preparedness Network Nepal Award 2014. That award was for my significant contribution in the field of disaster risk reduction. And in the same year, in January, I also got Australia Alumni Excellence Award also.
Well, congratulations on both of those. Well-deserved, I know.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about the Nepal earthquake today. Can you give us some background on what happened, when it was, and the damage it caused, and can you fill us in? A lot of us probably just saw pictures on the news, but you were there. You've got first-hand knowledge of what really occurred and what happened.
Okay. Actually, Nepal is highly prone to earthquake disasters, like western coast of USA, like Chile, like USA, Japan, and various other countries. And Nepal is 11th in earthquake disasters in the world. But Kathmandu Valley, there are 3 cities in Kathmandu Valley. Kathmandu Valley is number 1 in the world in earthquake disasters, vulnerable to earthquake disaster because of poor construction practices. Oh. And we have the history of series of earthquakes since 12th century. And actually two kings in 12th century and in 13th century lost their lives in earthquake. So it's very interesting history of earthquake in Nepal. And this very recent earthquake occurred in 25 April 2015. And the local time was 11:56 a.m. local time. And it occurred in a geological collision zone where the Indian tectonic plate pushes north into the Eurasian plate, moving the ground an average of 2 centimeters a year. So our plate is called Indian plate, and the another plate which is towards the north of Nepal is called Eurasian plate, or we also call it Tibetan plate. They collide each and every year. And the epicenter was actually not in Kathmandu Valley. Fortunately, it was 81 kilometers towards the west of Kathmandu Valley. Because,
Okay.
as I already mentioned, Kathmandu is highly populated area, which is the capital city of Nepal, and
Hmm.
the population is above 4 million in the valley. So the epicenter was 81 kilometer northwest from Kathmandu, and the earthquake actually killed nearly 9,000 people.
Wow.
8,891 people died, and 198 people are still missing. Means, yeah, above 9,000.
Oh,
And
wow.
22,303 people and millions of others were homeless. 22,000 were injured, and millions of people were homeless, and still many people are homeless. They are living in temporary shelter in various parts of the country, and more than 600,000 households were fully damaged due to that earthquake. And the measurement was 7 point, according to American Geological Society, it was 7.8. According to our Department of Mines and Geology, it is 7.6 Richter scale. So it was not that big, but because of poor constructions, the damage was so high. And the
Mhm.
earthquake affected 14 districts of Nepal. We have 75 districts in our country. It's not a very big country, but the size is maybe equivalent to your California, maybe smaller than California. So we have 75 districts, and 14 districts were hard hit by that earthquake.
Wow.
Yeah.
So half the country was really impacted. Over half the
Uh,
country
yeah,
was impacted.
nearly half of the country. Yes,
Wow.
yes.
So with that many people, injured and unfortunately that many casualties, that had to have had quite the economic impact on Nepal, and everything that happens within it, like all the services that are provided to people, because I remember seeing some of the pictures and fantastic temples that were just destroyed
Oh,
and,
yes, yes.
wonderful buildings. How did Nepal deal with that? Like what, it couldn't have just been, impacts from the earthquake itself. Obviously, there had to have been greater impacts to the country overall, how it was running and everything.
Sure. Yeah. The situation was chaotic situation, and yeah, actually, the government was helpless in the event of that earthquake. Anyway, our security personnel from Nepal Army, Nepal Police Force, and Nepal Armed Police Force and other volunteers. They did a very difficult job. They worked day and night, and we carried out search and rescue for several days. And in the meantime, we had international communities also coming to help us in Nepal, including the USA, of course. So we had foreign teams to help us after several hours. And actually, the total economic loss is estimated about US dollar $7 billion. It's a very huge amount. And still, as I already mentioned, many people in suburbs in Kathmandu, Lalitpur, and Bhaktapur, and other places and cities, they are still living in the tents. Means our recovery is too slow, actually, too slow. Recovery is not satisfactory. The immediate search and rescue was, yeah, taking into account the available resources, it was okay, but recovery is too slow. That is mainly because of the volatile political situation in Nepal and also the poor management. But something is going on, and people are constructing their own houses, and government also is helping. International community also is helping. But again, the recovery is taking very slow space.
So, do you still have some of these foreign agencies in the country helping out? I find it hard to visualize families building their own homes. So, do they have assistance? Are they still receiving assistance, or are they really doing it themselves?
No, actually, most people they are doing themselves. The government is providing subsidy, is providing some cash assistance. Is nearly 300,000 rupees. That is $3,000 was paid to the affected people in installment basis. So actually, most people they constructed their own houses themselves. Government also helped, but many people they helped themselves. They constructed themselves, but it is not satisfactory again because, as I already mentioned, people are still living in temporary houses, which economic condition is poor. They are still living in poor shelters, in temporary shelters.
So how is that impacting businesses then? Because it must be difficult for businesses to be operated as well.
Yes. Yes, business was affected for months, for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months, depending upon the size of the business. So some industries they were closed for months, and later on they recovered. They are now into operation. So that is why I told you that the total loss is estimated to be $700 billion. So which is a huge amount for Nepal. And international communities means bilateral and multilateral agencies also they committed assistance to Nepal. But unfortunately, most of the countries and communities who committed to provide cash assistance to Nepal, they have not yet provided the committed amount of money. They have provided some portion of the committed amount, but they have not fully provided the committed money. So that is one problem. But you see, I think money is not a problem. Even the government of Nepal has not enough money, but they also have a significant amount of money for this recovery. But the problem with us is poor management. Because
Yes.
of volatile political situation, and also the government formed this earthquake reconstruction authority, a very powerful authority, and they appointed the CEO, Chief Executive Officer. But because of the change of the government in 6, 7, 8 months, they again changed the CEO, and the new CEO came, and again he was changed. So this kind of thing disturbed the recovery process. You see, so this is actually because of politics within the country. So management is a problem for us, not the money.
Wow. So with businesses then, with money, were they not well? I guess let's forget the money. With businesses and this changing of government and their expectations, is that the biggest problem that Nepal is facing right now? To try and recover from the earthquake is the government keeps, for lack of a better term, keeps changing its mind and changing its direction, and is that the biggest hindrance to Nepal fully recovering?
Yes, that is the biggest hindrance, the volatile political situation and the change of the government in few months, not even a year, you see. The government keeps changing in 6 months, 7 months, 9 months. So that is why we have the new prime minister, new cabinet, and they don't take good decisions. That is the main problem in all fields, you see, not only in this earthquake recovery, but in each and every sector. It is the main hindrance, main problem.
So does that, because there's instability in the government, does that also hinder outside sources trying to help as well? Like if I had a company that wanted to come in and help all those people build homes, that's hindering me, right?
Yeah, because as I earlier mentioned that the international community committed a handsome amount of money to provide to the government of Nepal for earthquake recovery. But the money is not yet there because they blame that Nepal has no good governance. The government keeps on changing, so they don't trust. And they say that Nepal government has no absorption capability. I mean, they cannot spend money. which is true.
Mm.
That is why they hesitate to provide the committed money. And it is true that Nepal government has low capability of spending money. Even Nepal government has not been able to spend its own money in the last fiscal year. Only 50% of the total development budget was spent. 50% was unspent.
Wow. All this money coming in, all these helping hands that are out there, and it all bottlenecks with the government, trying
Yes,
to help
yes,
all
yes,
these people and
yes.
businesses, get the country back up on its feet.
Yeah,
The pictures I've seen are absolutely beautiful. It was a shame to
yeah,
see the damage that the
yeah,
earthquake caused people. But
yeah, yeah.
okay, on that note, we're going to take a break and we're going to come back and we're going to talk about going forward. What some of the things that Nepal will consider, as they try to move forward and recover from this earthquake. And we're talking today with Professor Meen Chhetri, and we'll be right back. Before we went away on the break, we were talking about some of the socio-economic impacts and some of the things that are occurring in Nepal. But right now, I'd like to know what's happening in Nepal now to move forward. What's the plan to go forward? I know you've mentioned there's some roadblocks, but what's the overall plan, to happen so that Nepal can recover?
Okay. Earlier, I forgot to mention an important point. That is, you see, the earthquake occurred on 25th April 2015, and international community, international search and rescue teams were there, and we got very good help from international community. But you see, India also was there. India, which is our neighboring country. India, China are our neighbors, these two countries. But you see, because of this internal political game, India blocked everything. The supplies from India to Nepal was blocked. You see, in September 2015,
Wow.
For about 6 months. That was. They didn't say this is a blockade, but and our Nepal government also never declared that this is a blockade from India. But in reality, it was a blockade, and that caused a very big problem to Nepal's daily life. You see, because Nepal is heavily dependent on India on many supplies, many things like fuel. Food and merchandise and other machineries and various other things. So our trade deficit also is quite high with India because we import quite a lot from India and the export is too low. Anyway, but India, they didn't declare, but because there was some demonstrations and some unrest in southern part of Nepal, border to India. Some political parties they were demonstrating against the government. That was internal matter, you see, political matter. But Indian government they levied blockade to Nepal, and the fuel supply was blocked, and other materials also were blocked, and that caused inconvenience to Nepalese daily life because we could not get goods and services in due time. And the loss from the earthquake in that period was $7 billion, which I already mentioned. But the loss due to the Indian blockade to Nepal was $21 billion, 3 times more.
Wow.
So 2015 was a really bad luck year for Nepal.
Wow. Yeah. So that obviously had to have had a major impact on the rebuilding and all efforts, right?
Yes. In all sectors, you see, in tourism, in export, import, in earthquake recovery, and industries and various other service sectors of Nepal. As I already mentioned, we are heavily dependent on India for the supply of goods and services, including the gasolines. So it was very hard time for us. You see, a very difficult time.
So that would have made it
about 6 months.
Wow. So that would have made it harder to even recover because you needed the materials even to be able to rebuild homes.
Oh, yes.
I'm assuming that's was part of the stuff that was blockaded, or
Yeah.
not allowed
Yeah.
to enter.
Yes.
I'm curious, did the same thing occur on the Chinese side?
No, no, no. They were quite helpful. China tried
Oh,
to help us, but because of the geographic situation, you see, because China is on the north, India is to the south, east, and west of Nepal. So the topography of Nepal border to China is more difficult, you see, and the access roads to China are quite few. And they are not they are narrow roads, you see, single lane roads.
mhm.
So it is difficult to get supplies from China. Otherwise, China was happy to help us. China was with Nepal, but India, you see, really created a very big problem to Nepal, and it was international concern also. It was an international issue also. Every country knows it.
Wow. I didn't know that. I didn't know goods were held back at the border there. Well, interesting piece. I do know with China. The reason I asked that question is I believe a colleague from the Teams organization was involved with that. Jack, I think.
Jack, yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
yeah, I
Jack
think
and
Jack.
Ocean,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's right. Yes, I
yeah.
remember seeing pictures of him leading teams in Nepal as well. So that's why I was curious to know if the same thing happened, on the Chinese side. But I'm glad to hear
No,
it didn't. You
no.
know.
From China, we
Uh,
had we have no problem so far.
oh, wonderful.
Yeah. And
Okay.
actually, this kind of blockade is not a new thing. From India, we experience this kind of problem. This is the third time. You see, they did it three times. Long before, also they did the same thing
Oh, so
because of political
this.
matters. It's a politics. You see, politics between the two countries.
Well, that's a shame, knowing that all these people
Same.
and businesses need to get up and running and have been impacted by an earthquake, and it's the politics that are hindering
Yeah.
recovery.
Yeah.
Not the people's willingness, or organizations' willingness to get involved and get out there and help, but
Yeah.
rather the people, in office that are causing the bigger problem. So that's sad. That's not good to hear. Is there anything else you'd like to say on the earthquake before we move on to the floods, the recent floods and landslides?
Um, I think yeah. Yeah, earthquake is the most frightening disaster for Nepal because it causes heavy loss and damage, property loss and human life loss. Although it doesn't occur every year, but that is number one disaster from the point of view of Nepal. Yes, now we can talk about other disasters. Yeah, floods and landslides also are big disasters. They occur each and every year in Nepal, and this year also we had very severe floods and landslide disasters in various parts of the country.
So what if like earthquakes, you have a lot of floods and landslides? What were the impacts there? They must have compounded things from the earthquake, but what additional impacts did the floods and landslides cause?
Okay, actually, Nepal, you see, the geology of Nepal is very young. Means this Indian plate moved. Maybe you know that the Earth was a mega continent 55 million years before. So this part means Nepal, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Bhutan. This plate came from south to the north slowly 55 million years before. So this is the youngest part in the earth. That is why this part of the world is very fragile,
Mm-hmm.
very because of young geology. And in Nepal, there are more than 6,000 streams and rivers. More than 6,000 streams and rivers, which
Really?
flow, yeah, which flow mostly from north towards the south, generally with high velocity due to high river gradient.
So
And
is that snow runoff from the
oh
Himalayas?
yes, most of
Okay.
most of the big rivers are snow-fed, which
Okay.
not all rivers, some big rivers are snow-fed, which originate from the Himalayan ranges, you see, which is border to China on the north. and that are covered by perpetual snow. And as the topography of the country is steep, rugged, and high angle slope with complex geology, very high intensity of rainfall during monsoon season. We call it monsoon season. Our monsoon season starts in mid of June, and it stops in the middle of September. Now the monsoon is over. So July, August, September is rainy season in Nepal, and it causes floods, landslides, and debris flow. So this rainy season is very difficult for us because of landslides and floods in various parts of the country. And the problem of floods and landslides occurs each and every year in Nepal, but some years are more devastating, you see. We have severe floods and landslides in 1993 and again in 2000, 2006, 2008, 2014 and this year 2017. These years, the floods and landslides caused a heavy loss of human lives and physical properties. And in 1993, more than 1,350 people lost their lives in floods and landslides. That was the biggest disaster in the history of floods and landslides in Nepal. And in 2000 also we had a very severe flood, but human life loss was not that big, but economic loss was quite high. And again this year in 2017 in August, in the month of August, we have severe floods and landslides in the Middle Hill region and in southern part of the country. And due to the landslide alone, 75 people were killed. And due to the flood disaster, the human life loss was 201. So it means 276 people died in this year alone. And the economic loss is millions of dollars, and still the government is carrying out the damage assessment. So we don't have the exact figure now. But this year heavily flooded our southern part of the country.
So with these landslides and floods, because they're fueled by the monsoon and some of the runoff water from snow, does that mean that these landslides are choking off some of the transportation routes and making it harder? Because you mentioned yourself that a lot of the areas in Nepal are quite remote. So if you have these landslides, in effect, some of these areas are getting cut off, right? And you can't help. It makes it hard to help them.
Our roads are most of the roads are across the hills and mountains, and due to the fragile condition of the topography, whenever there is floods and landslides, of course our roads are swept away, are damaged. And sometimes the roads are blocked for several days, for 2-3 days. It takes time for us to reconstruct. So it happens daily, you see, in one or the other parts of the country. And because the landslide and flood with debris, they result in severe damages in the roads and crops, even settlements and other physical constructions.
So hopefully, does that mean some of these roads now are being, how do I say this, strengthened? Like, is there an action in place to strengthen some of these remote roads so that they're not as susceptible to floods, which seem to occur on a rather consistent basis?
Yeah, they are restored, but still in some places they are still not blacktop. They are not still well functioning. Maybe double lane roads are still single lane. So it takes another 2-3 months to make them fully functionable. So still we have problem, and still it is raining. And again, just yesterday also, one of our highways was blocked due to the landslide. So it occurs even in the dry season. You see, because of the fragile geological condition of the country.
So, with these remote areas and landslides and even the earthquakes, how do you get aid to these people? Because the roads, like you mentioned, are going to be blocked. So, what are the challenges in trying to get there? How do you get there?
Actually, for emergencies, to transfer the seriously injured people or sick people who needs medical treatment, we use helicopters. You see, to transfer them from one place to another place. Otherwise, for transfer of goods and other services, we have to wait and see. There is no way out. That is why we need to construct actually tunnels. You see, like in Japan. But our economic condition doesn't allow, and maybe our engineers are not that capable to make tunnels. But this is very high time for us to think about constructing the tunnels in the hills to be safe from the frequent floods and landslides. The road damage due to floods and landslide is a very serious, very big problem for us. Each and every year.
So the only way, first of all, the only way to get to some of these areas is by air.
Yes,
you can't obviously go by river.
Or on foot, or by using horseback or mules, or transfer of goods and services by animals. We also do it.
Well, it still makes it tough to get the supplies and the medical equipment that you need to these locations, because you have to kind of go back to non-modern techniques, a mule and things like that, instead of just hopping in a big truck and then going up the highway. That's currently not the option. So okay, on that, we're going to take our second break. We're talking today with Professor Chhetri, and we'll be right back. And welcome back to Preparing for the Unexpected. Today we're talking with Professor Meen Chhetri from Nepal, who's giving us some great insight on the Gorkha earthquake in 2015 and some fantastic information about the floods and landslides that have been occurring consistently through the years. And in this last segment, I'd like to touch base on the disaster policies that Nepal has put in place. During our break, you started to touch on a couple of key points there. Could you kind of give us some insight of, with all these disasters that occur in Nepal on an ongoing basis, what is Nepal doing about some of this, and what is their policy?
Okay, while talking about policy, actually Nepal is the pioneer to formulate and implement disaster management legislation. Nepal formulated Natural Calamity Relief Act in 1982 in this region. I think that time even India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Pakistan and Bhutan, they didn't had any disaster management legislation. We did it. But unfortunately, Natural Calamity Relief Act was formulated and implemented in 1982. But the government failed to formulate other supporting legislations like disaster management policy, disaster management rules, regulations, standing orders, codes, building codes, fire code or wind hazard code. That kind of other supporting legislations were not formulated in due time. Now we have various other policies and acts, and that Natural Calamity Relief Act 1982 is basically focused on response. It fails to deal after disaster preparedness and recovery. So that is why we were in need of a proactive disaster management legislation. So keeping in view this situation, our center, Nepal Center for Disaster Management, which is actually a NGO working for the government and other sector, other sectors. So we drafted Disaster Management Act for the convenience of the government of Nepal in 2007. And earlier, the focal agency, the main agency for disaster management in Nepal is the Ministry of Home Affairs, which I mentioned in the beginning also, where I used to work between 1995 to 2005 for more than 10 years. I nearly worked for 12 years. I also worked in disaster management department also. So that act which I'm talking about, Natural Calamity Relief Act in 1982, was a kind of incomplete solution. You see, it could not deal after disaster preparedness and recovery, because focal agency was the Ministry of Home Affairs, and Ministry of Home Affairs has no resources, human or material resources for preparedness and recovery, because that is a administrative ministry. That ministry can carry out response works, but not recovery and preparedness. That is why we envisaged, we told to the government that we need a separate, powerful agency for disaster risk reduction in Nepal since 2007. You see, that is why we drafted Disaster Management Act and handed over to the government for formulation and implementation. And the government worked on it, revised our draft from time to time, but it was not enacted. It was not enacted again because of the changing of the government, because of the political volatile political situation. So once it went to the parliament, that time it was Constituent Assembly 2 years before, and I think 3 years before. And again, the parliament was dissolved, and that bill, without becoming the act, came back to the Ministry of Home Affairs. And fortunately, this year, very recently, I guess it is on 25th September last month, it was passed by the parliament. So now we have Disaster Risk Reduction Act for Nepal, and now we have a very powerful council, powerful body to look after the disaster management, disaster risk reduction activities in Nepal, headed by the Prime Minister himself. That is called Disaster Management Council. Disaster Management Council will be headed by the Prime Minister himself, and there will be other 13 ministers as the member of that council, and other stakeholders also will be there. So now we'll have a very powerful body, and I think now onwards our disaster risk reduction activities will be very efficient, will be very effective, and now the trend of disaster losses will be reduced significantly. Let us hope so, because now we have now we have the new act. And earlier, you see the head, the chair of national, we call it Central Disaster Relief Committee. Central Committee was headed by the Home Minister, but now we have the Council, National Council for Disaster Management, and that council will be headed by the Prime Minister himself, and also there will be other very powerful 13 ministers. So I hope that it will be very good now onwards. That is in brief about the policy.
So with the Disaster Management Council and the PM chairing it, what's that council going to be fully responsible for? What are they going to do? What are they going to make people or organizations do?
Okay, actually, they will make the policies. They will direct the other stakeholders, and there will the council will be headed by the Prime Minister, and there will be another executive committee which will be headed by the Home Minister, and that will be responsible for response work. You see, and again there will be another executive committee which will be headed by a CEO, by a chief executive officer, which will be a bureaucrat, and that will be a executing agency. And also now Nepal is in federal system, has entered into federal system. So we'll have federal states. We have say 7 federal states, like you have 50 in USA. So we have now 7 federal states, and we'll have the chief minister in each state, and they will head the state councils. And also we have the districts, 75 districts again, and the districts will be headed by the chief district officer. And all these agencies are responsible for disaster preparedness, disaster response, and disaster recovery. Earlier it was mainly focused in recovery only, response only. So now these councils, these agencies are responsible to look after all aspects of disaster management, preparedness, response, recovery, rehabilitation, reconstruction, mitigation, everything.
So they'll be helping create the policies that all areas within the country have to follow now, and putting like a standard in place that all the districts now follow, so that the responses and all the different pieces you mentioned are standard from area to area, correct?
Exactly. Yes.
So then you don't have anybody going off and doing their own thing. Now everyone is going to have the same set of roles and responsibilities and policies to follow.
Yeah. The problem with us in earlier times was that, as I already mentioned, that Natural Calamity Relief Act in 1982, according to that act, the Ministry of Home Affairs was the nodal agency, was the focal agency, was the main agency for disaster risk reduction in Nepal. But that ministry has no capability for disaster preparedness and response in recovery, for particularly for reconstruction and rehabilitation, because Ministry of Home Affairs, they don't have volunteers, they don't have engineers, they don't have geologists, they don't have warehouses, and they don't have other equipments for disaster risk reduction. So they mainly focused on response only whenever there is disaster, and then they went for response. That's all. So the approach was reactive. It was not proactive. While we need to have a proactive approach, means we need to have effective preparedness and recovery, which didn't take place in the past. But now we have separate councils, separate committees, separate agencies, from top to bottom, bottom to top. You see, from central level to local level. So we have various committees and various councils. So all those agencies are made responsible for all aspects of disasters, for preparedness, for response, recovery, rehabilitation, reconstruction, for everything. And they will have enough resources as well, I believe.
So the goal in the end is to help mitigate some of these disasters and reduce some of the impact upon the people and businesses and communities, right?
Yeah. And also we'll have a very powerful disaster management authority, which I mentioned earlier, and that will be headed by a CEO, and he will have several other branches, other divisions, or other field offices, having a lot of human and material resources, and they will also take care of all aspects of disaster risk reduction. And
that's great.
That authority will be guided, will be supervised by the Home Minister and the Prime Minister and other ministers who are in the Disaster Management Council on the top.
Now it makes some of these people and groups accountable to make sure that they've got these things in place, and that would help, I would assume, help with the distribution of resources when they're needed in specific areas, and it would help when you're going to the one district on the other side of the country, what they've got in place is the same as what's on the other side of the country. It would
Yes.
definitely help out everybody, in the government and the people, because they're all working under the same responsibilities now and the same processes.
Yes, you are right. Yes.
Well, that's great, because I know a lot of times, even in Canada here, there's some spots where one province does something different than the other one. But here, from what it sounds like in Nepal, it's going to have a collective same-mindedness, so to speak. Everyone's going to be on the same understanding, and it's going to be seen by the senior official, being run by the prime minister. So everyone now will know who's responsible for what, who does what, and when they do it, and they're all
Exactly.
following the exact same thing.
Yeah.
That's good. And congratulations on that, because you mentioned you were a part of putting some of all that together, and I know you have been involved in the past. So that's great.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you'd like to comment on in Nepal with regards to policies and disasters? And sadly, Nepal has gone through quite a few over the years. So is there anything else you'd like to add? Let us know about what's happening there.
No, actually, as I mentioned, our approach was a reactive approach. That is why we failed in preparedness and recovery in the past. But now, since we have a proactive legislation, which we envisaged, we aspire for that since a very long time. So I think, when that act will be implemented in reality, I think very shortly we'll have a very powerful authority. So I think it will get better. And actually, keeping in view the current disaster trends in Nepal, recognition of the importance of reducing disaster risk and building resilience with a goal against which efforts could be measured must be a major contribution to meeting the challenges, and this should be realized. And there was no specified agency to realize this need. And now, when we will have this powerful authority agency, I think that agency will be able to mainstream disaster risk reduction into development planning, and it will coordinate with all stakeholders, and which will help ultimately to reduce the disaster risks in Nepal significantly. Because the trend of losses in due to disasters in Nepal are in increasing trend. Now it will be in decreasing trend, I hope, um, after the composition of this disaster management authority.
Well, that's great. I really hope that goes in the direction that you're planning on it going. That would be a fantastic role, and maybe somewhere down the road we could actually talk about that again once things really start rolling with that committee. I'd like to thank Professor Meen Chhetri for joining and talking about Nepal and disaster policies in Nepal. Again, to anyone who's listening, if there's a topic you'd like us to talk about or be a guest on the show, send me an email at info@stone-road.com. Send me a note, and we'll see about getting a guest, getting you on as a guest, or finding someone to talk about a topic you want us to cover. Otherwise, in the meantime, thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Chhetri, and stay prepared, everyone. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave a message and let me know what your thoughts are. If you'd like to be a guest on the show to talk about something related to business continuity, disaster management, COVID, personal well-being, anything that's relatable to those subjects, you can reach me through my LinkedIn profile, which is in the video description. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. In the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.